Before we had water treatment plants and modern plumbing, millions of people lived across North America for thousands of years. They stayed healthy and thrived in every environment you can think of, from bone-dry deserts to frozen tundras. The way they did this came from pure intelligence combined with deep knowledge of the land that took generations to perfect. What made their approach so effective was something we've actually forgotten in our modern world. They understood water in a way most of us never will. Every tribe had their own techniques based on where they lived, and some of these methods would blow your mind if you saw them in action today. We're talking about people who could find water in places that look completely dry, who could make muddy pond water safe to drink, and who never poisoned their own water sources even without any environmental laws. Let's start with the #1 rule that every Native American tribe followed, no matter where they lived. Always go for the cleanest source you can find. They had to know their environment so well that they could tell which water was safe just by looking at the landscape. Moving water was always the top choice: rivers, streams, creeks, anything that flowed. There's actually a good reason for this that modern science backs up. When water moves, it gets exposed to air and sunlight. The oxygen in the air and UV rays from the sun naturally kill off a lot of the harmful bacteria and other nasties that make you sick. Stagnant water sitting in one place becomes a breeding ground for all kinds of problems. Springs were considered the absolute best. These are spots where water comes straight up from underground, filtered naturally through layers of rock and soil. Many tribes saw springs as sacred places, and they were right to treat them specially. That underground filtration system is incredibly effective. The water that comes out of a good spring is about as clean as you can get in nature. Tribes would build their villages near reliable springs whenever possible because it solved their water problem right from the start. But here's where it gets interesting. How did they find water in the first place, especially in areas where it wasn't obvious? They became experts at reading nature signs on the Great Plains. If you saw cottonwood trees or willow trees growing, you knew there was water underground within reach. These trees have deep root systems that tap into groundwater, so they only grow where water exists below the surface. Animal behavior was another huge clue. Deer trails, buffalo paths, even the flight patterns of birds could lead you straight to a water source. Animals need water just like humans do. They know where to find it. The Lakota, Cheyenne, and Blackfeet tribes who lived on the plains had to deal with a challenging situation. Rivers were great when you were near them, but what happened during dry seasons when you were traveling? They used something called buffalo wallows. These were natural dips in the ground where rainwater collected. Wallow water would often be muddy and dirty from buffalo rolling in these spots. When it's your only option, you make it work. The technique was simple and effective. Let the water sit in a container and the mud would settle to the bottom. The clearer water on top was safe enough to drink, especially if you took it one step further. That next step was stone boiling, and this technique deserves its own explanation because it was used everywhere. This is method #2 on our countdown of techniques. Imagine you're on the plains and there's not much wood around for a big fire, or you need to purify water quickly. You can't just boil water in a basket or leather pouch over direct flame. It would burn right through. So here's what they did. They'd build a fire and heat up rocks until they were scorching hot. Then they'd carefully transfer these superheated stones into their water containers using wooden tongs or sticks. The moment those rocks hit the water, it would start bubbling and boiling immediately. This method was incredibly effective. Boiling water kills pretty much everything harmful in it. Bacteria, parasites, all the microscopic threats that could make you seriously ill, they can't survive the heat. Experiments done by researchers showed that with enough hot stones, you could get water boiling in just 4 or 5 minutes. Plains tribes would use buffalo stomach pouches for this, since the leather could handle the heat as long as water was in it. Southwest tribes used pottery. Some groups even had a genius addition to this process. They'd cover the boiling water with large leaves. The steam would condense on the underside of the leaves and drip down as distilled water, which is even cleaner than boiled water. That's basically an ancient version of distillation. Now let's talk about the Southwest deserts, because this is where water strategies became absolutely critical. The Tohono O'odham people, who lived in what's now Arizona, had to survive in the Sonoran Desert, where rain might not fall for months. They couldn't just rely on finding a stream because streams might not exist for miles and miles. Their solution was rainwater harvesting on a level that would impress modern engineers. When monsoon rains finally came, they had systems in place to catch every drop they could. They built structures called charcos, which were basically small dams made of brush and earth placed at the mouths of arroyos. Arroyos are dry creek beds that only flow during storms. When flash floods roared down these channels, the charcos would slow the water down and direct it into collection areas or onto fields. They also used natural rock formations called tinajas. These are bowl-shaped depressions in rock that hold water after it rains. A good tinaja could hold thousands of gallons and keep it for months if it was deep enough and shaded enough to prevent evaporation. The Hohokam people, who were ancestors of the O'odham, took this even further centuries ago. They dug canals that stretched over 10 miles long and 30 feet wide in some places. The main purpose was irrigation for crops, and they also used these canals for drinking water. The trick was letting the water settle so sediment would fall to the bottom, then taking the clearer water from the top. They also dug wells, some of them 20 feet deep or more, and lined them with rocks to prevent cave-ins. When you live in a desert, you don't take water for granted. Every technique, every method, every storage system mattered. Women in these Southwest tribes would carry water in pottery vessels called alas. Some of these could hold over 20 gallons. They'd balance them on their heads using woven rings and walk miles from the water source back to the village. That's a huge physical challenge and a mental one too. Spilling water meant wasted effort and wasted water, and in the desert, you couldn't afford waste. These women were the water carriers, and they took immense pride in their role because everyone's survival depended on them, doing this job day after day. Method number 3 in our countdown is natural filtration through soil. This technique was used across multiple regions and was especially important on the plains and in desert areas. Here's how it worked. Let's say you come across a muddy stream or a dirty water hole. You dig a hole in the ground about a foot or two away from the water source. You wait a bit and water will start seeping into your hole through the soil. The earth acts as a natural filter. Sand and soil trap sediments and many impurities. The water that collects in your dugout hole is significantly clearer and cleaner than the original source. This same principle worked in dry riverbeds. Even when a creek bed looked completely dry on the surface, there might be water flowing underground. Tribes would dig down a few feet and line the hole with grass or hide to prevent it from collapsing. Water would seep up from below, already filtered by the sand and gravel. These were called seep wells, and they were lifesavers during drought conditions. Lewis and Clark wrote in their journals about seeing plains tribes use these techniques, and they noted that the water was remarkably clear and tasted good. Beaver ponds deserve special mention here because they were considered premium water sources. Beavers build dams across streams, which creates ponds. These ponds naturally filter and clean water. The still water allows sediments to settle. Plants grow around and in the ponds, which adds more natural filtration. The water is usually cold and clear. Many tribes, including the Blackfeet and Lakota, had deep respect for beavers in their culture and stories specifically because of this gift they provided. They understood that killing too many beavers meant losing these valuable water sources, so they protected beaver populations. Let's get to method number 4, which involves plants. This is where traditional knowledge really shines because we're talking about using natural chemistry without understanding the science behind it. It worked, and modern testing has proven why. In the Southwest, Navajo and Pueblo peoples would coat the inside of their pottery water containers with pine pitch. Pine pitch is the sticky resin that oozes from pine trees when they're cut or damaged. It has a strong smell and it's waterproof, which makes it perfect for sealing baskets and pottery. Here's the amazing part. Pine pitch also kills bacteria. Scientists have tested this in labs and found that pine resin is effective against E. coli and other harmful bacteria. The Navajo gained this knowledge through generations of experience. They knew that water stored in pine pitch-coated pots stayed fresh longer and didn't make people sick. That's empirical knowledge gained through careful observation over hundreds of years. Other tribes use juniper branches or berries in their water containers. Juniper releases oils that have antimicrobial properties. Same result, different plant. Willow bark was another addition. Some groups used willow contains salicylic acid, which is the active ingredient in aspirin. It has both medicinal and purifying qualities. Cattail roots and pollen were used by tribes near marshes and wetlands. Oregon grapefruit in the Northwest. Each region had plants that worked with their local water supplies. The key was knowing which plants did what and how to use them correctly. Too much of some plants could make water bitter or even unsafe. The right amount provided protection. Storage methods varied dramatically depending on whether a tribe was nomadic or settled in one place. Settled Pueblo communities used large pottery olas that could hold 20 gallons or more. These would sit in the coolest part of the home, often partially buried in the floor to keep them even cooler. Some pottery was left porous on purpose. Water would slowly seep through the clay walls and evaporate, which cooled the remaining water inside. This is the same principle as a modern evaporative cooler. Desert heat becomes your refrigerator. Nomadic plains tribes couldn't carry huge pottery vessels around, so they got creative. Buffalo provided almost everything they needed, including water containers. Buffalo bladders and stomach pouches, when properly cleaned and prepared, made excellent portable water bags. They were tough, flexible, and could be tied onto a horse or travois. Parflecha, which were folded rawhide containers, could also hold water for travel between known water sources. In the Pacific Northwest and around the Great Lakes, tribes had abundant water resources. Heavy rainfall, glacier-fed rivers, countless streams and lakes meant water was usually clean enough to drink straight from the source. When European explorers first made contact with tribes in these regions, they noted in their journals that indigenous people drank directly from lakes and streams without any apparent illness. Low population density and the absence of large-scale agriculture or industry meant natural water systems remained in pristine condition. Even in these water-rich areas, people understood seasonal changes and took precautions. In winter, northern tribes melted snow and ice. They learned to prefer older sea ice near coastal areas because it had lower salt content. Fresh snow was great, and you avoided yellow snow for obvious reasons. Some groups would add crushed mint or other plants to melted snow water to improve the taste. Birch bark containers were popular in the Northeast and parts of Canada because birch bark is naturally waterproof and lightweight. You could roll up a bark container and carry it easily, then unroll it when you needed to fetch water. The spiritual side of water in Native American cultures can't be separated from the practical side. This is crucial to understanding why their water stayed clean. Water was sacred. The Lakota called it Mni Wikoni, which means water is life. The Blackfeet believed water beings called Soy I Tapi lived in rivers and lakes, and these spirits had to be respected. This belief system provided environmental protection through culture. If your religion tells you that polluting water angers powerful spirits, you're going to be very careful about what you do near water sources. Tribes had strict taboos. No one threw waste near streams. No one contaminated springs. Some groups, like the Blackfeet, had rules against eating animals that lived in water to keep the water itself pure. Women often held special roles in water ceremonies and were considered the guardians of water. Before taking water, many people would offer prayers or tobacco as a sign of respect and gratitude. These rituals reinforced a mindset of conservation and care that kept water sources healthy for everyone. The Hopi and Zuni in the Southwest built their villages on mesa tops where springs emerged. They constructed rock-checked dams and small reservoirs to catch runoff. Every architectural decision in their settlements considered water access and conservation. They designed their entire way of life around protecting and efficiently using their limited supply. Their agricultural techniques, including the famous Three Sisters planting method, were designed to minimize water needs while maximizing food production. In California and the Great Basin, tribes dealt with different challenges. The Paiute and Shoshone people lived in areas with limited surface water, so they became experts at finding hidden springs and seeps. They'd dig small wells in valley floors where underground water was close to the surface. Plant indicators helped here too. Certain wildflowers and grasses only grew where soil moisture was high. Follow those plants and you'd find water. During extreme dry periods, some groups collected dew in the early morning using absorbent materials, then wrung out the water. The Chumash along the California coast relied on coastal streams and springs. Some of these springs actually emerge right on the beach or just offshore, where fresh water would bubble up through the sand, even surrounded by ocean finding, and protecting these freshwater springs was essential. Fog drip was another source. Coastal fog would condense on leaves and rocks overnight, and you could collect the drips in containers. It wasn't a huge amount, and in times of need, every little bit counted. Barrel cactus in the southwest deserts gets mentioned as an emergency water source. You can cut open a barrel cactus and access the liquid inside if you're dying of thirst. The liquid in barrel cactus is bitter and has a diuretic effect, which means it actually makes you pee more and can dehydrate you further if you're not careful. Native peoples knew this. They used barrel cactus when absolutely necessary as a last resort option. The contrast between different regions really shows how adaptable and intelligent these water strategies were. In the humid southeast, Cherokee and Creek peoples had rivers and streams everywhere. Their water containers reflected this abundance. In the northern subarctic, Cree and other groups dealt with frozen water for much of the year. Fire became essential for melting ice into drinkable water. They'd chip ice from rivers or gather clean snow and melt it in bark or skin containers suspended over flames. Aeration was another technique worth mentioning. Pouring water back and forth between containers adds oxygen to it. This serves multiple purposes. It improves taste by removing some of the flat quality that still water can have. It also helps kill anaerobic bacteria, which are organisms that can't survive in the presence of oxygen. This simple act of pouring water from one pot to another, letting it splash and mix with air, made the water healthier. It's the same reason aquarium owners use bubblers in fish tanks. When we look at all these methods together, a pattern emerges. Native Americans approach water with a combination of prevention, treatment, and reverence. Prevention meant choosing the best sources and protecting them from contamination. Treatment meant having multiple techniques ready when water quality was questionable. Reverence meant treating water as something precious that demanded respect and care. This three-part approach is something we've lost in the modern world, where water just comes out of the tap and we don't think about it. The sophistication of these systems becomes even clearer when you consider the engineering involved. Those Hohokam canals we mentioned earlier required calculating grades and slopes so water would flow properly. They built headgates to control water distribution. They maintained miles of channels through organized community labor. This represented advanced hydrology for its time. The AK-Chin farming systems of the O'odham, where they'd channel flash floods onto fields using precisely placed brush dams, required understanding of water flow, soil absorption rates, and timing. One mistake in the flood would wash away your crops instead of watering them. Today, many tribal communities face water crises. On some reservations, nearly half of all homes lack running water or proper plumbing. Ironically, some of these communities are now looking back to traditional methods for solutions. Pine pitch pottery filters are being studied for low-cost water purification in areas without infrastructure. Rainwater harvesting techniques are being revived. There's even discussion of beaver reintroduction programs to restore natural ponds and improve water quality in streams. There's incredible value in understanding how people solve these problems with nothing except natural materials and accumulated knowledge. These refined technologies developed and improved over thousands of years. The fact that they worked well enough to support millions of people across an entire continent proves their effectiveness. The spiritual beliefs about water being sacred supported practical knowledge. When you believe water is a gift from the Creator that must be honored, you're less likely to pollute it. When you think dumping waste in a stream might anger water spirits, you find somewhere else to dump waste. The religious and cultural aspects created a framework for environmental stewardship that worked better than many modern regulations. This integration of spiritual respect and practical technique is something we could learn from today as we face our own water challenges with climate change and pollution.